Hello students, welcome to Byju's IS. Welcome to a session on economy this week, wherein we'll be taking up some of the very important economy related articles which have appeared in various business related newspapers, and we'll be analyzing these particular articles. For this particular video, I've chosen the time period from 18th to 31st of May 2020, and the articles that I've chosen are from Hindu, Indian Express, Business Standard, Live Mint and Business Line. Let's begin the discussion. The first article is related to debt trajectory. Before we mention or discuss what is given in the article, what are the important points? First and foremost, what do you mean by the term debt? Please understand, annually, that is from one financial year to the next financial year, the government will announce a budget or will come out with the budget, and usually we see that in the budget, the expenditure of the government is higher than their income, or the revenue sources are lesser compared to the total expenditure incurred by the government. So what does the government do? Government borrows from the market. But apart from government borrowing from the market, usually you see that there is a practice of off-budget financing. That is basically the institutions which are owned by Government of India, such as Food Corporation of India, will borrow from the market in order to ensure that they will be providing the food grains at subsidized cost. But more important point to make a note of here is whether it is Government of India borrowing directly or it is an institution owned by Government of India borrowing in the market, the liability of the repayment will obviously fall on the shoulders of the government. So the overall liability of the government, that is, what is the total amount of a repayment that has to be done by the government, in simple terms is called as a debt. We calculate debt at the central level, we calculate debt at the state level also. Now please understand, in the present situation what is happening is the liability of the government in the form of the debt is actually increasing. We introduced the concept of FRBM, Fiscal Responsibility Budget Management Act 2003, and under this FRBM we wanted to reduce the fiscal deficit to 3% in a specific time period. We have not been able to achieve that. As a result of this, Government of India set up a committee headed by N.K. Singh. This particular N.K. Singh committee came out with a new framework in order to ensure that these particular targets will be met. And this particular committee, that is N.K. Singh committee, recommended that Government of India should not only reduce the fiscal deficit but also should reduce the overall debt. I'll repeat the statement here. N.K. Singh committee not only gave a target for the government to reduce the fiscal deficit, it also mentioned that government should reduce the debt also. Now earlier I mentioned that we calculate the debt at the central level, we calculate the debt at the state level also. The overall debt of a center plus a state, as per the recommendation of N.K. Singh committee, was supposed to be dragged down to 60%, of which the committee recommended that 40% of a debt. Again, when I say 40%, 40% of what? 40% of GDP. So 40% of this particular debt will be the limit for the center and 20% will be the limit for the states. So this particular committee came out with the recommendation saying that government should drag down its overall debt, or else we will use the term general debt. General means center plus state. So the overall general debt should be dragged down to 60% by financial year 23. Government of India has accepted this, but rather than keeping this particular target to be achieved by financial year 23, we have been revising this particular target. And very recently, these particular targets for both fiscal deficit as well as the debts have been redrawn to financial year 25. Now, what has happened in the current situation? Because of the onset of the pandemic, the revenues or the receipts or incomes of the government have taken a hit, not only of the central government but also of the states. On one side, the income generation has come down, and on the other hand, the expenditures have kept on creeping upwards. In order to meet these liabilities of expenditure, in order to ensure that there is sufficient money available to incur the expenditure, government has increased its borrowings. And since Government of India has increased its borrowings, you must have already seen the news which says the fiscal deficit of Government of India will be more than 4% for the current fiscal. And when the borrowings of the Government of India increases like this, don't you think the debt of the government will also keep on increasing? As such, even before the onset of the pandemic, we had estimated that the overall debt would be somewhere above 70% of GDP. That is, center plus state would be above 70% of GDP. Now, various experts are warning that because both the states as well as the center is borrowing more from the market and their incomes are coming down, the debt will increase to even more than 80%. Now, what is the problem if the debt crosses or is increasing and is at a very high level? Follow the argument very carefully. If the debt keeps on increasing like this, the repayment liability will also keep on increasing. That is, the government, be it the central government or the state governments, will have to pay huge amount of money in the coming years. Don't you think when this particular debt increases, liability increases, in the future there will be pressures on the finances of the government? That is one point. Second, as the debt keeps on increasing, the possibility or the probability of defaulting on the repayment will also keep on increasing. In simple term, the risk associated with the repayment will also keep on increasing. The experts will use another term, that is debt service payments. What do you mean by debt service payments? On the money, imagine I'm the government, you are the lender. I have given you a bond and in return you have given me 100 rupee. So after 1 year, I'm going to pay a coupon rate to you people, that is interest rate of 10%. So when my borrowing increases, debt service payments will also keep on increasing. And when debt service payments keeps on increasing, again there is a danger that the government is moving towards a higher risk profile. And when the borrowings will become risky like this, or the lending to the government becomes risky like this, the investors in the market, when they purchase the G securities from the government, they would also expect a higher rate of return. Because they are taking a higher risk, they expect a higher rate of returns. Now, what is given in the article? This particular article basically discusses some of the points that we have discussed here. That is, the debt of the government is increasing. And they have quoted the N.K. Singh committee report. And since the debt of the government has kept on increasing, now the N.K. Singh committee has to redraw the targets which they had set up for the government to achieve this particular fiscal deficit target and the overall debt targets also. This is a basic discussion related to the concept of the debt which is given in this particular article. Now, why they are writing returning to a sustainable debt trajectory is a big ask is for a simple reason. If the repayment has to be done of the borrowing, the government will be forced to achieve, or the government has no other option but to ensure that the GDP growth rate will be higher. Because when the GDP keeps on increasing or the rate of growth keeps on moving at a higher level like this, the incomes generated by the government will also keep on increasing. And when government generates huge amount of incomes, they will use these particular incomes to repay the existing debts or the services in terms of the interest on these particular debts. So that is the gist of the argument given in the article. Now, based on this, I have given one MCQ. Consider the following statements. Center's debt is higher than the debt of all the states put together in India. Please remember, the central debt is much higher. It is more than 40%, and the state's debt is more than 20%. So the statement is wrong. Central government debt is much higher compared to the overall debt of the states. So first statement is wrong. Second statement, the central debt is the sum total of internal plus external debt. What do you mean by this particular statement? Central government will borrow from internal market or domestic market, will also borrow from external market. So the debt or the liability of the government is the sum total of internal plus external debt. This particular statement is correct. But more importantly, you must remember this particular point. Although the debt of the government is increasing, majority of this particular debt of the government is internal in nature. Please make a note of this particular point. Although the government of India's debt is increasing, majority of this particular debt is internal in nature. Very small amount of this particular debt is external in nature. That is one very important point. Second very important point. Although this particular debt is increasing, Economic Survey makes a note that the long-term debt is very high compared to the short term debt. Is it okay? Or out of the total debt, majority of this particular debt is a long term in nature and remaining is short term, and this particular long term debt in proportion of the total debt has been increasing compared to short term debt. Now why this particular point is also very important. Imagine you give me a loan, I am the government, you give me a loan of 100 rupee. In the sense what? I will sell the G security to you, you will give me 100 rupee. Now if the maturity period of this particular G security is 91 days, then don't you think I'll have to repay the amount to you within a short period of time? And in the current situation such as the pandemic one, where my incomes are very thin, where my incomes are very low, don't you think short term debt will be a much more bigger problem for me compared to a long term debt? The second scenario will be what? Same G security I will issue to you, you will give me 100 rupees, but this second G security will have a maturity period of let's say 10 years. So don't you think in the second scenario I have much more flexibility in terms of repayment compared to the first scenario where the maturity period of the bond is very short. So these are the two very important points with respect to the debt of the government. So first statement is wrong, second statement is correct. Right option will be option B, only second statement is true. And since there is so much of discussion happening with respect to the debt of the government, the fiscal deficit of the government, the importance of N.K. Singh committee report, I have given you a straightforward descriptive question. Discuss the recommendations of a N.K. Singh committee report. Very important in the present context. Whenever you look at the finances of the government, every expert will keep on referring to the recommendations of this particular N.K. Singh committee report. Now, I have given a straightforward question in 250 words. You will have to discuss the recommendations of N.K. Singh committee. Now, what are the important recommendations? Just to give you a very brief idea. First and foremost, this particular committee has stated that rather than following the FRBM recommendations or the provisions under FRBM, you will have to introduce a new piece of legislation. Right? They have recommended a new piece of legislation. One. Second one, rather than following only the fiscal deficit target, we must also follow a target for reduction in the debt. That is, a general debt or overall debt has to be dragged down, which is 60%, 40% for center, 20% for state, which we have already seen earlier. Third, we must also reduce the fiscal deficit. The targets have been provided. Fourth, this particular committee has recommended an independent autonomous fiscal council. I'll repeat the statement. This committee has recommended an independent autonomous fiscal council. This particular council will keep on giving inputs to government in order to meet these particular targets. What measures have to be taken? What are the ways through which revenue can be generated? What are the ways through expenditures can be controlled? How these particular targets can be set up or managed year on year, so on and so forth. That is another very important recommendation. Fourth, they have given certain conditions with respect to the escape clause. They have given certain conditions with respect to escape clause. What do you mean by escape clause? In certain situations, government would have said that they will be able to achieve a certain percentage of fiscal deficit. But in certain situations, this particular target cannot be achieved. For example, the current situation. So, because there are higher expenditures and lower incomes, government will not be able to meet the fiscal deficit target which it had set up in the budget. So, escape clause will basically allow the government to relax the fiscal deficit target. Under the escape clause, this committee recommends that this clause can be triggered only in such and such situations. This has been again recommended by this particular committee. So these are some of the very important recommendations. Please read the recommendations and you will have to write this particular answer in 250 words. Now let's look at the next article. This particular article is related to mapping of skilled labor. First and foremost, majority of the labor that is there in India is not completely skilled. When I say completely skilled, you will have the labor which is either unskilled or semi-skilled labor. And that is a precise reason in case of India, you will see a huge amount of a labor which is informal in nature. That is basically those particular entities which employ less than or up to 10 units of employees are referred as informal employment opportunities. Again, there are multiple definitions of what is a formal, what is informal. I am going with one definition. You must also have heard of the concept of organized and unorganized. What is the basic difference? In case of unorganized, we usually consider the traditional sectors, whereas in case of organized sectors, the modern industries will be considered. So in case of India, majority of the labor is either unskilled or semi-skilled. Second point, majority of the labor is stuck up in informal. Third very important point, if you are a skilled labor, you make higher earnings compared to unskilled. As per this particular article, a skilled labor in India makes a 9% higher earnings compared to unskilled labor. Now, why this particular article was there in the newspaper? In recent times, you must have seen there is a huge exodus of the migrant laborers from some of the southern states or some of the states into their respective hometowns. And when this particular movement of migrant labor has happened and the industries start opening up, these particular industries will find very difficult to get access to labor. That is the first point. Second point, these particular migrant labor have moved to their respective hometowns, and when they have located back to their respective hometowns, imagine the economy opens up. Don't you think those particular industries which are there in the vicinity should find it very easy to get access to the labor, that is specifically the skilled labor which is present in their vicinity? And third, since majority of the Indian economy or majority of the manufacturing units are dependent on this particular migrant labor, we will have to have certain mapping of the labor which will help us in addressing this particular over dependency on the labor. Keeping in mind all these particular factors, the National Skill Development Corporation, which is an authority, an implementing authority of a Ministry of Skill Development, has come out with a proposal wherein this particular NSDC will have a joint venture with an artificial intelligence involved company, and they'll be skilling the labor in India. What kind of a labor? Specifically, skilled labor mapping will be conducted by this particular agency. What is the importance of it? As I've already mentioned, we must know what kind of a labor is available in which of the pockets of industrialized centers in India. And once the economy starts opening up, once the industries or manufacturing companies will start opening up, they will actually require this particular access to labor. And if you have a map which will basically give you the information related to the availability of the skilled labor around or in your surroundings, it will help the employers to get access to this kind of a labor. That is the whole objective of skilling or having a map of skilled laborers here. Apart from this, the article also mentions that this particular map of skilled laborers will be ready by mid-June. Okay, so these are some of the very important points discussed in this particular article. Now, based on this discussion, let's have a look at a question here. Consider the following statements about NSDC. It is a Section 8 company under the Companies Act of 2013. Now, please understand, very often you will come across this particular term of a Section 8 company. What do you exactly mean by Section 8 company? Those particular companies or those particular entities which are set up as a non-profit organizations. Those particular entities which are registered as a non-profit organizations under Section 8 are referred as Section 8 companies of Companies Act of 2013. Is it okay? So, is NSDC a Section 8 company? Yes, it is a Section 8 company. Second, it has been set up under PPP with the government owning 51%. Here are some of the very important points. This was set up under the model of public-private partnership. Is it okay? First point, it was set up under the model of public-private partnership. What do you mean by public-private partnership? Both government as well as the private sector will participate to provide certain services. That is, both will come together, enter into an agreement which is referred as a concessionaire agreement, and they will decide we will achieve this particular objective. NSDC was set up as a PPP. That is correct. But second point or second part of the statement is wrong. It was set up as a PPP with the government owning 51%. No, under this particular PPP model for NSDC, the private sector is owning 51% and the government is owning 49%. So first part of the statement is correct, second part of the statement is wrong. So altogether second statement will be wrong. First is correct, second one is wrong. So right option for this particular question will be option A, only first statement is correct. The next article, government caps airfares. This was there in the newspaper. Government has opened up the civil aviation market. That is, it has basically allowed the companies to start up utilizing these particular air routes to fly the customers from one city to another city, but with certain conditions, with certain caveats. What are the conditions? First and foremost, all the aeroplanes or all this particular infrastructure that is available for these particular civil aviation companies will not be utilized as of now. As per the guidelines issued by the government, only 1/3 of the carriers will be used as of now. That is the first point. Second very important point, Government of India has put certain guidelines with respect to the airfares. That is, what price per ticket will be charged by these particular companies. The government has basically divided these particular airfares based on the time taken as well as the distance traveled by these particular civil aviation companies into 7 segments. Is it important to mug up all of them? Not important. All that Government of India says is this: what should be the minimum price, what should be the maximum price, that will be decided. And second very important point, 40% of the seats which are sold will have to be sold at the average price of the lowest airfare and the highest airfare. These are some of the very important provisions or important conditions which have been imposed by the government with respect to restarting the civil aviation market. Various experts have criticized this particular approach of the government. Let's evaluate what are the reasons why Government of India took such a step and what will be the consequences or concerns related to this particular decision. Starting with, what is the reason? Why did Government of India put a cap on the airfares? This particular industry or the civil aviation market did not have any kind of operations in the last, let's say, 2.5 months. And since there were no operations, these particular companies were incurring continuous expenditures, and there was a danger that the civil aviation market will incur huge amount of losses and some of the air carriers will be thrown out of the business. Now, Government of India says that if I open up the market now, that is basically allow you to start taking passengers, flying passengers now, you have not made any kind of a revenue for last 2.5 months. And if I allow you to fix the airfares, you will obviously fix a very high amount of airfare. And when you keep on fixing very high amount of airfare, this will become a burden on the passenger. You will simply charge a very high exorbitant pricing on these particular customers. This is the prime reason why Government of India has come out with the capping of the airfares. But what are the consequences of this? Will the airfares be controlled? Definitely yes. But again, understand this also. This particular approach of the government will also have certain unintended consequences. For example, these particular companies have already started incurring huge amount of loss. On one side, their expenditures have been happening like this. For example, salaries of the employees. On the other hand, government says you cannot charge more than this particular amount for a ticket price now. So what will happen? There will be constraints on the revenues which can be generated by these particular companies. Second very important point. We do not know how this particular situation of the pandemic is going to pan out, let's say 2 months down the line or 1.5 months down the line. Will the air passengers keep on increasing or decreasing? That is also not sure. Because until unless we are sure of the trajectory of the virus, we will not be sure of whether this particular travel will be preferred or again government will put a ban on this particular travel. So initially for first couple of days or first couple of weeks, there will be higher demand for this particular route of transportation. And the companies which are involved in this particular sector should have been allowed to fix their fares and generate certain revenue. Because after certain months, we do not know whether it is going to continue or again there will be a ban on this particular travel. Third, government has made it mandatory for these particular companies to follow certain sanitation measures in order to ensure that the customers or the passengers will not be affected by the virus. And when a company is imposed with these kind of restrictions, is made to follow these particular protection measures, their cost of operations are going to increase. On one side, cost of operations are increasing, and on the other side, there is a cap on the fares. Don't you think the revenues of these particular companies will be affected? And fourth, are these particular companies allowed to use all the infrastructure at their dispense? No. As earlier mentioned, one third of these particular infrastructure that is available, for example, aeroplanes that are available, will be allowed to be used as of now. So they are not even allowed to use all the resources that are available at their dispense. Luckily, in favor of the civil aviation companies, one factor that is working right now is that the oil prices in the international market are lesser. Is it okay? I'm saying compared to, let's say, what was the oil price 3 months ago or 5 months ago, right now the oil prices are much moderate, which will benefit these particular companies because they are consuming aviation turbine fuel, and majority of the expenditure or a substantial amount of the expenditure for these particular companies will be in the form of aviation turbine fuel itself. So this is working in favor of these particular companies. But what is a guarantee that the prices of the ATF will remain same? Let's say 1 month down the line, if the crude oil prices suddenly shoot through the roof, the ATF cost is going to increase. As such, operation costs are already higher. Ticket prices are capped for 3 months by the government. And the input cost, that is ATF cost, is going to increase. Don't you think this will basically have a negative impact on these particular companies? Next very important point. There are certain regional air carriers, small air carriers also. What if they are unable to provide the services as per the cap on the fares which has been fixed by the government? What if their fares are higher than the mandated fares of the government? So these kind of regulations of the government may simply push these particular weak air carriers out of the business. These are some of the very important points related to this particular decision of the government. Next article is related to oil prices. In the last couple of months, the international crude oil prices have kept on declining. Again, in the recent times, they have started picking up. But if you see the overall price, there has been more than 40% decline in the crude oil prices in the international market. So on one side, we are seeing that international crude oil prices have declined. The prices in retail market in India for petrol and diesel have kept on inching upwards. Why is it so? Please understand, India imports more than 80% of its requirement of the crude. So whenever the international crude oil prices will vary, it will have an impact on what should be the retail prices of these particular fuels in the Indian market. But usually this does not happen like this, or this kind of a correlation does not exist. For a simple reason, apart from the imported price, apart from the price of the crude oil, there are also various other factors which will have an impact on the pricing of these particular fuels in the retail market. I am referring to the taxes imposed by the central government as well as the states. Central government imposes excise duty on the sale of petrol and diesel. States also impose VAT or sales tax on the sales of petrol and diesel in the retail market. So what has happened in the international market? Crude oil prices have kept on coming down. So obviously the import cost will be lesser. But on the other hand, rather than retail pricing falling down, they are not coming down in a proportionate form. Why is it so? It is for a simple reason. The government has kept on increasing the taxes that they are imposing on these particular fuels. Have you understand this? Let's imagine, just hypothetically, let's imagine the imported cost is 40 rupees and earlier tax imposed by the center plus state was 10 rupee each. Again, just hypothetical number. So this particular fuel, when it is sold in the retail market, is 60. Again, I am not accounting for all the factors. There is a retailer margin, there is a OMC margin. Do not worry about all of it. Now what has happened? This particular component, international crude oil price component, has come down from, let's say, 40 rupees to 25 rupee. But what the center has done, it has increased its tax component. States have increased their tax component. As a result of which, the consumers are not getting the full benefit of this particular reduction in the international crude oil prices. Now, various experts call this as a ionic situation. They'll say it is an irony in the pricing of these particular fuels. Why it is referred as a irony? Because please understand, central government has basically deregulated the pricing of the fuels such as petrol and diesel. What do you mean by deregulation? In 2010, Government of India said the petrol prices will be decided based on the supply and demand forces in the market. That is on day-to-day basis. Currently what we are doing, we are following a concept called as dynamic pricing, under which the retail prices of these particular fuels will be decided on day-to-day basis. So we have introduced a market-led mechanism or deregulated the pricing of petrol in 2010, pricing of diesel in 2014 has been deregulated, which means it should be the market forces of supply and demand and other parameters which should be deciding the prices of these particular fuels. But government, by interfering in the market, by basically increasing the taxes that they have imposed, have ensured that the benefit of this particular reduction in the international crude oil prices is not augmenting at the customer level or at the consumer level. And this has been made very clear by the government. It has stated that they have consciously kept on increasing the taxes so that they will be able to generate certain revenues. That is, they will impose higher taxes, collect more revenue from the sale or the retail sales of these particular fuels, which will help the government in meeting certain expenditure criteria. But the argument is this: on one side you are saying these particular fuel prices have been deregulated, but on the other side you are ensuring that by increasing the tax rates the market prices will remain higher. So one, don't you think you are going against the theme of deregulation? And second, though the international crude oil prices are coming down, consumers in India are not going to get the benefit of this. I used a term called as irony. The second reason for this is Government of India imposed restrictions in the form of a lockdown. There were large number of restrictions with respect to transportation. Consumption of fuels came down. Government kept on increasing the taxes on these particular fuels. So don't you think the objective of the government will also not be met? Because there is a lockdown, demand for the fuel has already plummeted. And at that point of a time, you are increasing the taxes on these particular commodities. Don't you think it will be much more rational to implement or increase the taxes when the consumption is higher, rather than imposing when the consumption is already lesser? So these are some of the very important points which are discussed in this particular article of oil price pickle. Based on this, let's solve a question here. Consider the following statements. Petrol and diesel prices have been deregulated in 2010, petrol in 2010, diesel in 2014. So this particular statement is wrong. Both central and a state government impose a tax on petrol. This is correct. So right option will be option B, only second statement is true. And next article is related to self-reliance. In the recent times, there has been a lot of talk related to concept of a self-reliance. And this particular article, which appeared in Hindu on 27th of May, basically discusses what is the issue related to this particular argument of achieving self-reliance in India. Please understand, this particular idea of a self-reliance is not a new one in case of Indian planning. If you see the evolution of planning in India, you will see that self-reliance was one of the long-term goals which was set up by the Planning Commission. You must have heard of the four very important objectives of Planning Commission. That is GEMS, GEMS, growth, equity, modernization and self-reliance. I'll repeat it: growth, equity, modernization and self-reliance. So focus on the last one there, self-reliance. So even before this particular announcement of Atmanirbhar package or self-reliant India package, in the beginning of the planning itself, that is a post 1950, there was this particular concept of a self-reliance present in the planning objective. The basic idea of a self-reliance was import dependency must be brought down. We must be able to produce as many goods as possible in the domestic market itself. That is the precise reason we went for the concept of a Mahalanobis strategy from the second 5-year plan, wherein the focus was what? Industrialization was the central theme there. How it has fared out? how it has panned out in case of India. Though we had this particular objective of a self-reliance and we tried to achieve this particular concept of self-reliance by promoting setting up of public sector enterprises. This article says that the objective of self-reliance was not achieved satisfactorily in case of India. What happened? Majority of the sectors or important areas were reserved for the participation of a public sector enterprises. So the scope of a private sector enterprises participating in this was very limited. Research and development, which was supposed to be done in, let's say, development of new types of goods, investment in new technology, all of it was focused on the concept of the PSEs itself. PSEs became very complacent. They did not invest in all these particular objectives, as a result of which, initially when we set up the PSEs, these were much superior compared to the PSEs of other countries. But over a period of time, these particular PSEs performance became very unsatisfactory. That is the reason you must have seen post 1970 there is a discussion related to the stressed public sector enterprises. On the other hand, I said very small amount of a space was reserved for operation of private sector enterprises. They did not invest to the expected level because these particular sectors were not interesting for these particular private sector enterprises. Now, over a period of time, Government of India has changed the stance. Government of India has thrown open the sectors and expects the private sector, especially the foreign companies, to come into India, set up these particular operations in India, use better technology, do better research and development, and the other companies in the domestic market will be able to absorb this particular technology and there will be self-reliance in case of India. Having said so, this article says that even this has not been achieved in case of India. Why? For a simple reason, it is one thing to expect these particular foreign companies to come and start operating in India, and another thing to see that the domestic companies will absorb the technology. It doesn't happen. Why? These particular companies, especially the private sector companies, will be very much guarded about their technology. They will not give this particular technology, or they will ensure that the technology that they are using, the information related to that will not be available to everyone in the market. Hence, it cannot be expected that foreign companies, when they come and set up the shops in India, even the Indian companies will be able to absorb this kind of a technology. And even today in case of India, most of the research and development that has been done, the investment in this is being done by the public sector enterprises only. Having said so, the investment done is also very less. As per this particular article, the investment done by the PSEs is somewhere in the range of 1% of GDP. It has to be picked up. So what is the way forward? What has to be done in case of India? So the recommendations given in this particular article are: 1. The article says that India has already missed the opportunity to become one of the very important participants in the third industrial revolution. However, even today there is still some scope of India leveraging its sector or being a very important participant in areas such as artificial intelligence, robotics, solar power, so on and so forth. So India must move towards these particular areas. Second, there is a need to reorient the functioning of the public sector enterprises. Third, the state funded research has to be picked up. I've already mentioned the total amount of investment done in this particular area is somewhere in the range of 1% of GDP. It has to be picked up. And finally, this article says that you need to invest in upgrading of education as well as skill development. So these are some of the very important recommendations given in this particular article. So these are the important articles as well as the questions related to these particular articles for this particular time period. Thank you. Have a good day.